The year is 5400 BC. In the scorching heat, where two mighty rivers converge into marshlands that stretch beyond the horizon, a small band of farmers drives wooden stakes deep into the rich black earth. They cannot know they are about to birth humanity's greatest transformation. They only understand that the soil here drinks the annual floods and gives back abundance, that fish swim thick in the reed-choked channels, and that their children might finally escape the endless wandering that has defined mortal existence since the world began. This delta, cradled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, will become the stage for civilization's dawn. Here, in what future peoples will call Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, the seeds of urban life take root in mud that seems ordinary, but carries within it the potential to reshape destiny itself. The landscape defies easy description. Neither fully land nor water, it shifts with the seasons like a living thing. Spring floods transform the region into a vast inland sea, depositing layers of fertile silt that glisten black as obsidian under the desert sun. Summer heat bakes the earth into cracked plates, while underground water keeps the roots of date palms alive. Winter brings respite and renewal, preparing the cycle to begin anew. These early settlers understand water as their master and servant both. Too little means death. Too much sweeps away months of labor in a single night. Learning to tame the floods becomes their greatest innovation, one that will echo through millennia of achievement. They dig channels to carry excess water away from their fields, construct earthen barriers to protect their grain stores, and gradually discover that controlling water means controlling life itself. The Ubaid people, as archaeologists will later name them, spread throughout southern Mesopotamia like drops of water, finding every depression in the landscape. Their villages dot the delta, wherever high ground offers refuge from the annual inundation. Each settlement begins the same way. A cluster of mud brick houses surrounding a modest shrine, the whole community elevated on a platform of packed earth that lifts it above the floodline. But Eridu stands apart from the beginning. Founded sometime around 5400 BC on a slight rise overlooking the marshes, this settlement becomes the prototype that truly deserves the name city. What begins as another farming village transforms into something unprecedented as a generation after generation chooses to expand rather than spread out to found new communities elsewhere. The reasons seem practical at the outset. Eridu sits at the perfect intersection of river channels and overland routes, making it a natural gathering place for trade and exchange. Yet commerce alone cannot explain the city's magnetic pull. Its true power lies in the sacred complex at its heart. The initial shrine is modest enough. A simple rectangular building with thick walls and a single doorway facing east toward the rising sun. Inside, the community places offerings to Enki, the god of fresh water who ensures the rivers flow and the springs bubble up from the earth's depths. But this building differs from the household shrines found in other villages. It belongs to the entire community, not to any single family, and its priest serves all the people rather than merely his own kin. Each generation rebuilds the sanctuary larger and more elaborate than before. Where their fathers constructed walls of pressed mud, sons shape standardized bricks and mortar them with bitumen. Where grandfathers offered prayers from ground level, grandsons build platforms that lift their ceremonies closer to heaven. Layer upon layer, century upon century, the sacred structure grows upward like a man-made mountain reaching toward the realm of the gods. By 4500 BC, Eridu's religious complex towers over the surrounding marshlands, its white-painted walls visible for miles throughout the flat delta. Travelers, approaching from any direction, see it immediately. A beacon of ambition rising from the primordial mud, proclaiming that here dwells something greater than mere survival. The sanctuary becomes the beating heart of a new kind of society. Every morning before dawn, farmers stream through the city's gates, carrying surplus grain from their fields. Priests weigh each contribution on bronze scales, their precision a marvel that visitors from distant villages struggle to comprehend. Reed styluses scratch records into soft clay tablets, the world's earliest written words, though they contain no poetry or prayers, only the practical business of accounting for barley and livestock, oil and silver. These clay records reveal the economic revolution that transforms Eridu from village to metropolis. The sacred complex serves as granary, treasury, and market all at once. When the floods come early and ruin the barley crop, families survive on grain stored in the sanctuary's massive chambers. When merchants arrive from the eastern mountains carrying obsidian and lapis lazuli, they trade under the gods' protection for prices the priests judge fair. When disputes arise over water rights or property boundaries, the religious courts settle them with authority that even the proudest farmer accepts. The city spreads outward from this sacred center, like ripples on still water. The wealthy build their homes on the high ground, closest to the ziggurat, spacious compounds with multiple rooms arranged around central courtyards, their walls decorated with painted murals depicting scenes of abundance and divine favor. These houses contain workshops where artisans craft jewelry and tools for trade, storage rooms filled with goods from throughout the known world, and private shrines where family heads make offerings to household gods. Further from the sanctuary, the neighborhoods grow more crowded and practical. Here live the potters and weavers, the fishermen and metal workers, whose skills keep the metropolis functioning. Their houses share walls to conserve precious building materials, their rooms smaller and simpler, their decorations limited to geometric patterns pressed into wet plaster. Yet even these modest dwellings represent wealth beyond the dreams of nomadic ancestors, who owned only what they could carry on their backs. The gulf between rich and poor widens with each generation, carved in stone by the size of their homes and the goods they take to their graves. Elite burials contain golden jewelry and carved ivory, bronze weapons and imported stones that speak of trade networks stretching to the ends of the earth. Common graves hold simple pottery and copper tools, modest markers of lives lived in service to the greater community. Social stratification crystallizes for the earliest time in history, yet it emerges gradually enough that each generation accepts as natural what their grandparents might have found shocking. The priests, claiming divine authority to interpret the gods' will, assume leadership roles that extend far beyond religious ceremony. Successful merchants accumulate wealth that allows them to sponsor public works and ceremonial feasts, earning respect that translates into political influence. Skilled craftsmen form specialized guilds that control access to essential technologies, making their cooperation necessary for the city's prosperity. By 4000 BC, Eridu houses nearly 15,000 souls, a population that would have been unimaginable to their nomadic ancestors. Children born within the city walls have never known the uncertainty of wandering, the constant search for water and shelter that defined mortal existence for countless millennia. They take for granted wonders their great-grandparents could not have conceived, streets that lead to specific destinations, neighbors whose names and trades remain constant year after year, shops where desired goods can be found without traveling for weeks. This is no longer a village where everyone knows everyone else's business. Eridu has become something entirely new under the sun, a true metropolis with all the possibilities and problems that urban life entails. The transformation spreads throughout southern Mesopotamia as other communities attempt to replicate the city's success. Uruk rises on the banks of the Euphrates, dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love and war. Emerges near the river's mouth, honoring Nanna, the moon god who guides travelers through the darkness. Each settlement develops its own character and specializations, yet all follow the pattern established at the delta's edge. A massive religious complex surrounded by neighborhoods arranged according to wealth and occupation. Competition between settlements drives innovation at an unprecedented pace. The invention of the potter's wheel revolutionizes ceramic production, allowing artisans to create vessels of startling uniformity and beauty. The development of bronze working transforms both agriculture and warfare, providing tools that last longer and cut deeper than anything their ancestors possessed. The domestication of donkeys and the invention of wheeled carts makes trade possible over distances that once required weeks of dangerous travel. But the greatest innovation is writing itself. What begins as simple marks pressed into clay to record economic transactions gradually evolves into something more sophisticated. By 3500 BC, Sumerian scribes have developed a system of wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform, that can represent not just concrete objects, but abstract concepts, actions, and relationships. The initial literature appears, not epic poems or religious hymns, but practical manuals for administration, legal codes for settling disputes, and mathematical texts for calculating areas and volumes. The scribal schools, or adubas, become centers of learning, where young men from wealthy families master the complex art of writing. These institutions preserve and transmit knowledge throughout generations, creating the foundation for all future scholarship. Students copy and recompile ancient texts, learning not just to write, but to think systematically about law, mathematics, astronomy, and theology. The Uruk period, spanning roughly from 4000 to 3100 BC, witnesses urbanization on a scale that transforms the entire character of civilization. Uruk itself grows to cover nearly 6 square kilometers, its population swelling to perhaps 50,000 inhabitants. The city's influence extends throughout Mesopotamia and beyond, as Uruk-style settlements appear in the region and even into Anatolia and Iran. This expansion represents humanity's initial experiment with something approaching globalization. Uruk merchants established trading posts in distant lands, spreading Mesopotamian innovations while bringing back exotic materials that local craftsmen transform into luxury goods. The standardization of weights and measures facilitates commerce over vast distances. Common artistic motifs and architectural styles create a shared visual culture that spans from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. The great ziggurat of Uruk, reaching toward heaven with its staged terraces and monumental staircases, becomes the architectural symbol of this new age. Standing over 40 meters high, its white limestone casing gleaming in the desert sun, the massive structure proclaims ambition on a scale that dwarfs anything previously attempted. Pilgrims journey for weeks to offer prayers at its summit, carrying home stories of wonder that spread the fame of Mesopotamian civilization to the ends of the known world. Religious concepts evolve alongside urban growth, becoming more sophisticated as they must explain increasingly complex societies. The pantheon expands beyond local agricultural deities to include gods of war, justice, wisdom, and craftsmanship. Divine specialists who mirror the division of labor developing in the cities below. creation myths emerge that place mortals at the center of cosmic purpose, created by the gods to serve their needs through offerings and ritual observance. The concept of divine kingship begins to take shape as successful military leaders claim sacred authority to supplement their temporal power. These early rulers present themselves not as tyrants imposing their will through force, but as earthly representatives of divine order, chosen by the gods to maintain justice and prosperity for their people. The institution of monarchy, destined to dominate political organization for millennia, finds its earliest expression in the palace complexes that rise alongside ziggurats in Mesopotamian cities. Trade networks extend in every direction from the Mesopotamian heartland, carrying not just goods, but ideas over vast distances. Sumerian agricultural techniques spread north into the rain-fed regions of Syria and Anatolia. Mesopotamian metalworking influences developments in the Caucasus Mountains and the Iranian plateau. The concept of writing itself migrates along trade routes, inspiring parallel developments in Egypt and the Indus Valley that will produce distinct but related literary traditions. Yet for all their innovations, these early Mesopotamians remain recognizably mortal in their hopes and fears. The literature they create reveals people concerned with the same fundamental questions that perplex every age. Why do good people suffer? What happens after death? How should we treat our neighbors? What do the gods require of mortals? The Epic of Gilgamesh, though not yet in its classic form, begins to take shape as storytellers weave together tales of the legendary king of Uruk, who seeks immortality but must accept the limitations of existence. These early versions of the epic express themes that will resonate throughout cultures and millennia: the value of friendship, the inevitability of loss, the search for meaning in a world that often seems arbitrary and cruel. As the 4th millennium BC draws to a close, the transformation is complete. The descendants of nomadic hunters and gatherers have created urban civilization, complete with monumental architecture, complex institutions, sophisticated technologies, and intellectual traditions that will endure for thousands of years. They have learned to live in communities of unprecedented size and complexity, developing systems of law, governance, and social organization that allow tens of thousands of people to coexist peacefully in concentrated settlements. The agricultural surplus that makes this transformation possible also creates new vulnerabilities, dependent on irrigation systems that require constant maintenance, vulnerable to droughts and floods that can destroy years of accumulated wealth in weeks. These early cities discover that civilization itself becomes a hostage to forces beyond mortal control. The same specialization that creates wealth also creates interdependence. Potters who cannot grow their own food, farmers who cannot make their own tools, priests who depend on others for everything except spiritual guidance. Competition between cities intensifies as populations grow and resources become scarce. What begins as peaceful trade gradually includes military expeditions to secure access to essential materials or to capture slaves who can perform the manual labor that urban life requires. The development of bronze weapons and organized military formations transforms warfare from ritualized combat between champions to systematic campaigns designed to destroy enemy capacity for resistance. The world that emerges from this crucible bears little resemblance to the scattered farming villages that dotted southern Mesopotamia just 2 millennia earlier. Cities rise like islands of concentrated population above the floodplains, their inhabitants larger than entire regions could once support. Specialized craftsmen create objects of stunning beauty and complexity. Merchants travel thousands of miles to acquire materials from distant lands. Scribes preserve knowledge in permanent form that can be transmitted through generations without change or loss. Most importantly, people have learned to conceive of themselves as participants in projects larger than individual lifespans. The ziggurat builders know they will not live to see their constructions completed, yet they labor with enthusiasm for achievements that will outlast their own mortality. Priests maintain rituals and preserve texts that connect their communities to sacred traditions stretching back to the beginning of time. Kings proclaim laws and undertake public works designed to benefit subjects they will never meet in kingdoms that will survive long after their deaths. This expansion of consciousness, the ability to think beyond immediate needs and individual lives, may be civilization's most profound innovation. It makes possible not just cities and writing systems, but art and science, law and literature, all the achievements that distinguish culture from animal survival. The Sumerians who create the world's urban civilization cannot know they are establishing patterns that will influence development for thousands of years to come. They only know they have built something remarkable from the mud of the delta, something worthy of their children and their children's children. The age of wandering has ended. The age of cities has begun. Standing in the shadow of the great ziggurat as the fourth millennium draws to a close, watching merchants from distant lands conduct business in a dozen languages, while priests record transactions in the world's earliest written script, an observer might sense they are witnessing a hinge moment in the story of civilization. The future stretches ahead, full of possibilities that nomadic ancestors could never have imagined. Empires and law codes, epic literature and mathematical theorems, astronomical observations and architectural marvels. But the past already seems impossibly distant. The memory of wandering endlessly in search of game and seasonal plants has faded into myth and legend. These city dwellers, for all their sophistication, can barely comprehend the courage and endurance of ancestors who survived for countless generations, with nothing but stone tools and accumulated wisdom passed down through oral tradition. The transformation is irreversible. Humanity has eaten from the tree of knowledge, learned to reshape the natural world according to purpose and design, discovered that cooperation on a massive scale can create abundance beyond individual capability. There will be setbacks and catastrophes, dark ages when cities crumble and populations scatter. But the fundamental insight remains. People working together can achieve what no individual could accomplish alone. From the mud of Mesopotamia, civilization has emerged like a flower blooming in the desert. Fragile still, dependent on favorable conditions and careful tending, yet destined to spread throughout the earth and transform every aspect of existence. The Sumerians have lit a fire that will never be extinguished, begun a conversation that will continue as long as people inhabit the earth. The cradle has been built. Now comes the greater challenge, learning to live within it without destroying what makes civilization possible in the beginning. Dawn breaks over the marshlands of Sumer as Eannatum of Lagash leads his bronze-tipped phalanx toward the disputed border. Behind him march farmers who abandoned their barley fields to settle once and for all, who controls the life-giving canals that separate his domain from rival Ummah. The year is 2450 BC, and combat has become as regular as the flooding of the rivers, a season of violence that returns inevitably as settlement fights settlement for water, land, and the favor of the gods. This is the early dynastic period, when southern Mesopotamia fragments into a patchwork of competing polities, each ruled by monarchs who claim divine mandate while eyeing their neighbors' territories with naked ambition. Gone are the days when a single great center like Uruk could dominate the region through trade and cultural influence alone. Now dozens of settlements dot the landscape, their walls bristling with watchtowers and their armies clashing in battles that will echo through eternity. The king list, compiled centuries later by scribes attempting to impose order on chaos, begins with the declaration that rulership descended from heaven. According to this mythical chronicle, the deities initially granted eternal dominion to Eridu, but after the great flood that nearly destroyed the world, divine authority scattered among multiple centers. Kish received the blessing, then Uruk, then Ur, power flowing like floodwater from one metropolis to another as fortunes rose and fell. Yet beneath the mythology lies a harsher truth. Sovereignty belongs to whoever can seize it and hold it against all challengers. The evolution from priest-ruled communities to warrior kingdoms unfolds gradually but inexorably. In the earliest days, the Dynasty, literally Lord of the Plough, governed through religious authority and community consent. These priest rulers managed irrigation systems, supervised grain distribution, and mediated disputes. But their power remained circumscribed by tradition and the approval of citizen assemblies that could withdraw support from leaders who failed to serve the common good. Combat pressures transform everything. As populations grow and arable land becomes scarce, settlements begin raiding their neighbors' territories for slaves and livestock. Successful war leaders accumulate followers and wealth that translate into political influence. The title Lugal, big man, emerges for commanders who can protect their communities from external threats while leading profitable expeditions against enemy territories. Initially, the Lugal serves only during emergencies, surrendering authority to the NC once immediate dangers pass. But as conflict becomes constant rather than occasional, temporary leadership hardens into permanent autocracy. The Lugal builds his own palace complex to rival the traditional religious center, surrounds himself with professional warriors loyal to his person rather than the community, and begins claiming divine sanction for decisions that once required popular approval. Ur-Nanshe of Lagash exemplifies this transformation. Rising to power around 2550 BC, he presents himself as both successful general and pious servant of the deities, commissioning stone reliefs that show him carrying baskets of earth for construction projects, while also depicting his victories over neighboring settlements. His inscriptions, among the earliest historical documents in the world, proclaim achievements in combat and peace with equal pride. Ur-Nanshe, ruler of Lagash, son of Gursar, built the wall of Girsu, built the wall of Nina, dug the Pasala Canal, made the Girsu sanctuary for Ningirsu. But Ur-Nanshe's greatest legacy lies in establishing the dynasty that will produce Yanatum, whose campaigns expand Lagash's territory throughout southern Mesopotamia. The famous stele of the vultures, carved to commemorate Eannatum's victory over Umma, reveals both the brutal reality of ancient combat and the religious ideology that justifies it. On one side, ranks of soldiers march in perfect formation behind their shields, trampling the corpses of their enemies, while vultures tear at the flesh of the fallen. On the reverse, the god Ningirsu holds a net containing captured prisoners, emphasizing that this victory belongs ultimately to divine will rather than mortal strategy. The stele's inscription provides vivid details of ancient battle. Eannatum, ruler of Lagash, granted strength by Enlil, nourished by Ninhursag, given the right scepter by Ningirsu, chosen by Nanshe, struck down Umma. He left 3,600 corpses. At the Antasura of Ningirsu, he left 60 soldiers of Umma. Such precise casualty figures reflect the systematic nature of record keeping, but they also reveal the devastating scale of intercity conflict. These are not ritualized combats between champions, but battles of annihilation designed to cripple enemy capacity for resistance. The development of organized formations, tight phalanxes of spearmen protected by large rectangular shields, allows disciplined armies to overwhelm less organized opponents through superior tactics and equipment. Bronze weapons technology gives decisive advantages to polities that can afford to equip their warriors with metal-tipped spears and axes. The composite bow, constructed from wood, horn, and sinew, provides range and penetrating power that overwhelms traditional leather armor. Four-wheeled battle carts, drawn by donkeys and carrying a driver plus a warrior armed with javelins, serve as mobile command platforms and symbols of authority. Yet for all their innovations, rulers understand that lasting power requires more than battlefield success. Each monarch must also demonstrate divine favor through magnificent construction projects, elaborate religious ceremonies, and generous support for the priesthood that legitimizes autocratic rule. The palace and the ziggurat become partners in governance, secular and sacred authority reinforcing each other while competing for influence over the citizen body. The economic foundation of this political system rests on the institution that made urban civilization possible, the sanctuary economy. By 2500 BC, major religious complexes control vast agricultural estates, worked by dependent laborers who receive rations in exchange for their service. These sacred lands, theoretically belonging to each settlement's patron deity, provide the surplus that supports not only priests and religious personnel, but also the craftsmen, merchants, and administrators who keep complex urban societies functioning. Kanesh, the sanctuary administrator at Girsu, manages an economic empire that would challenge modern corporate executives. His records, preserved on thousands of cuneiform tablets, reveal the staggering complexity of religious operations. Herds of cattle and flocks of sheep numbered in the tens of thousands, fields planted with barley and emmer wheat stretching across hundreds of acres, workshops producing textiles and leather goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. The sanctuary of Ningirsu employs specialists whose job descriptions read like a catalogue of urban occupations: fullers and dyers who process wool into finished cloth, metalworkers who cast bronze tools and weapons, carpenters who construct everything from furniture to boats, brewers who transform barley into the beer that serves as daily wages for manual laborers. Each group maintains its own hierarchy of masters, journeymen, and apprentices, creating vertical social structures that cross-cut the horizontal divisions between rich and poor. Women play crucial roles in this sanctuary economy, though their activities often remain invisible in records written by male scribes. The Nadatu priestesses of Nippur control substantial property and conduct business on their own behalf, while female textile workers constitute the backbone of cloth production that generates much of the region's export wealth. The En priestess, highest religious authority in many settlements, wields power that rivals or exceeds that of secular leaders, particularly in matters relating to fertility, agriculture, and the annual sacred marriage ceremonies that ensure divine blessing for the community. These ritual marriages between political or priestly figures and representatives of major deities reflect the understanding that earthly authority must remain grounded in cosmic order. The ruler who fails to maintain proper relationships with the heavenly powers, who neglects required ceremonies, shows insufficient respect for traditional observances, or permits moral corruption to flourish in his domain, risks not only divine displeasure, but popular revolt by subjects who interpret natural disasters as evidence of leadership unfitness. The pantheon grows increasingly elaborate as urban societies develop more sophisticated governmental and economic institutions. An, the sky god, reigns supreme but remains distant from daily affairs. Enlil, lord of wind and storm, serves as executive authority who enforces divine decrees. Enki, master of wisdom and fresh water, provides the knowledge that makes civilization possible. Inanna, goddess of love and war, embodies the passions that both create and destroy societies. Each major settlement claims special relationship with particular deities who serve as divine patrons and protectors. Enlil dwells in Nippur, making that center the religious heart of Sumer, despite its relatively modest size and limited political power. Enki resides at Eridu, honoring the ancient settlement where urban life began. Inanna rules from Uruk, the great commercial metropolis, whose influence extends throughout the known world. These divine associations create religious obligations that transcend political boundaries, as pilgrims from every community journey to attend festivals and make offerings at sanctuaries controlled by their rivals. The standardization of weights and measures facilitates commerce between communities that might be at war politically but remain economically interdependent. The barley standard becomes the basic unit of value, with silver serving as a medium of exchange for high-value transactions. Interest rates on loans, recorded in countless business documents, stabilize around 20% annually for silver and 33% for grain, figures that suggest both the profitability of trade and the risks involved in commercial ventures. Long-distance commerce connects regional settlements to resources and markets extending from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia. Merchants traveling to Dilmun, modern Bahrain, bring back copper and precious stones from the Arabian Peninsula. Expeditions to Magan, Oman, secure supplies of diorite and other hard stones used for sculpture and construction. Trade with Meluha, the Indus Valley, provides ivory, pearls, and exotic woods that demonstrate wealth and international connections. These commercial networks spread innovations throughout the ancient world, while bringing foreign influences into Mesopotamian settlements. The potter's wheel revolutionizes ceramic production across vast regions. Cuneiform writing adapts to record languages from Syria to Iran. Mesopotamian artistic motifs appear on objects found in archaeological sites thousands of miles from their place of origin. Yet cultural exchange flows in both directions. Local craftsmen incorporate techniques and designs learned from foreign artisans. Religious concepts evolve through contact with other theological traditions. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh, quintessentially Mesopotamian in its themes and setting, incorporates narrative elements that reflect influence from neighboring cultures. The invention of the lunar calendar brings mathematical precision to agricultural and religious observance. Astronomers divide the year into 12 months, based on lunar cycles, then add intercalary months to maintain alignment with solar seasons crucial for farming. This calendar system, with its sophisticated understanding of astronomical relationships, influences timekeeping throughout the ancient world and provides the foundation for calendar systems still used today. Mathematical innovation extends far beyond practical computation. Scribes developed the sexagesimal system, base 60, that survives in modern measurements of time and angles. They create multiplication tables, solve quadratic equations, and calculate areas and volumes using geometric principles that anticipate later Greek mathematics. The educational system that produces these mathematical achievements, centered in the Aduba scribal schools, represents humanity's earliest systematic approach to formal education. Students in these schools master not only technical skills, but also the literary and religious traditions that define cultural identity. They copy and memorize epic poems, hymns, and wisdom literature that preserve the community's understanding of proper behavior and cosmic order. The curriculum includes practical subjects like accounting and law, alongside more theoretical studies in theology and natural philosophy. The legal system that emerges from these educational institutions reflects sophisticated understanding of justice and social order. Although no complete law code survives from this period, thousands of legal documents reveal courts that handle everything, from property disputes to criminal cases. Judges weigh testimony, examine evidence, and render verdicts based on established precedents rather than arbitrary personal preference. Contracts for the sale of land, houses, and slaves demonstrate the development of private property concepts that distinguish these laws from earlier communal systems. Marriage agreements specify dowries, inheritance rights, and grounds for divorce with precision that suggests centuries of legal evolution. Adoption documents provide for children's welfare while protecting adult interests in ways that balance individual rights against family obligations. The rise of professional warrior classes transforms both combat and society. No longer can every citizen farmer be expected to defend his community with agricultural tools converted to weapons. Successful armies require soldiers who train constantly, fight in disciplined formations, and remain loyal to commanders rather than local communities. These professionals must be equipped, fed, and housed by the larger society, creating new economic burdens that require either increased taxation or successful campaigns that pay for themselves through plunder and tribute. The famous Standard of Ur, discovered in the burial ground and dating to approximately 2600 BC, illustrates both the wealth generated by successful combat and the social stratification that victory creates. One side depicts scenes of conflict, soldiers in bronze helmets marching in formation, chariots trampling fallen enemies, prisoners being led away in defeat. The reverse shows scenes of peace, nobles feasting on fish and meat while musicians provide entertainment, servants carrying abundant food and drink, prosperity flowing from triumph to civilian enjoyment. Yet the standard also reveals the human cost of constant conflict. The burials at Ur include not only the monarchs interred in the main chambers, but also dozens of attendants, soldiers, musicians, and servants who were killed to accompany their rulers into the afterlife. These mass human sacrifices, unique in the civilization, suggest that some leaders claimed divine status so complete that their deaths required the destruction of entire households. The religious ideology that justifies such extremes draws on creation myths that place conflict at the heart of cosmic order. In this understanding, the deities themselves engage in constant struggle for supremacy, with younger powers overthrowing their elders through cunning and force. Mortals who imitate divine behavior through combat and conquest thus participate in fundamental cosmic patterns rather than violating natural law. This theological framework provides legitimacy for expansion, while also imposing moral constraints on rulers who claim divine authorization. Monarchs must demonstrate not only strength, but also justice, wisdom, and piety. They must protect the weak, maintain religious observances, and ensure that their subjects prosper under protection. Failure to meet these obligations can result in divine punishment that manifests through defeat, natural disasters, or popular rebellion. The development of autocratic ideology reaches sophisticated expression in the literary works produced for palace audiences. Court poets compose hymns praising achievements while also establishing standards for proper conduct. Inscriptions proclaim victories and construction projects while emphasizing the ruler's role as servant of the deities and protector of his people. These literary innovations culminate in the earliest versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which transforms the historical ruler of Uruk into a legendary hero whose adventures explore fundamental questions about human nature and divine justice. Though Gilgamesh possesses superhuman strength and achieves mighty deeds, he must ultimately accept the limitations that distinguish mortals from the divine. His friendship with Enkidu, his grief at his companion's death, and his futile quest for immortality express themes that transcend the specific context of this civilization. By 2400 BC, the system of competing polities has achieved remarkable stability despite constant conflict. No single power has proven capable of conquering and holding all the others, creating a balance that allows each community to maintain its independence while participating in the larger cultural sphere. Trade continues, even between enemies. Religious festivals draw pilgrims from hostile territories, and cultural innovations spread rapidly throughout the region. Yet this very success contains the seeds of transformation. The wealth generated by urban civilization, the technologies developed through constant conflict, and the administrative systems created to manage complex societies provide the tools that ambitious rulers will soon use to transcend the limitations of the fragmented system. The age of empires approaches, bringing both opportunities and dangers that will test whether this civilization can adapt to challenges that exceed anything it has previously faced. Lugalzagesi of stands ready to attempt what no ruler has achieved before: the unification of all Sumer under a single crown. His success will demonstrate that the fragmented system has become obsolete, while his ultimate failure will reveal that independence faces threats more dangerous than traditional intercity conflict. The old world trembles on the edge of transformation. New powers rise in the north, where Semitic peoples learn local techniques while developing innovations of their own. The future belongs to empires rather than independent polities, to professional armies rather than citizen militias, to rulers who claim universal dominion rather than local authority. But for now, in this golden afternoon of civilization, the ancient settlements maintain their proud independence. Their walls stand strong, their deities receive proper honor, and their people prosper under the protection of leaders who balance ambition with tradition. The greatest achievements of the world's earliest urban culture lie ahead, awaiting the challenges that will either destroy or transform everything that has been built. In the darkness before dawn, the high priestess Enheduanna climbs the sacred steps of Ur's great ziggurat. Her bare feet whisper against stones worn smooth by countless pilgrims, while below her the sleeping metropolis spreads like a vast web of flickering oil lamps. The year is 2285 BC, and she carries within her mind the most profound questions that torment the mortal soul. Why do people suffer while the immortal realm endures in bliss? What meaning can finite beings find in an infinite cosmos? How should the living honor the dead who have passed beyond all earthly concerns? Tonight, as every night for the past decade, Enheduanna will stand before the statue of Nana, the moon god, and weave these eternal mysteries into words that transform ancient wisdom into living truth. She is humanity's first named author, the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, yet her literary genius transcends politics and conquest. In her hymns and poems, the raw experiences of life, birth and death, love and loss, triumph and catastrophe, become windows into the very structure of reality itself. The worldview that emerges from these sacred texts reveals a cosmos both magnificent and terrifying in its complexity. Unlike later mythologies that will imagine comfortable heavens or peaceful afterlives, This universe operates according to principles that offer little consolation to those seeking simple answers. The immortal realm mirrors the mortal world in its capacity for violence, jealousy, and arbitrary cruelty, while also demonstrating powers of creation, wisdom, and justice that dwarf earthly understanding. At the summit of existence stands An, the distant sky father, whose authority encompasses all that exists yet, who rarely intervenes directly in worldly affairs. Like a cosmic monarch ruling through appointed officials, and delegates immediate governance to subordinate deities who oversee specific domains within the universal order. This hierarchical structure reflects the political realities of society, while also providing theological explanations for the complexity and apparent contradictions of natural phenomena. Enlil, master of wind and storm, serves as An's chief executive, wielding the power to enforce celestial decrees through elemental forces that can either nourish or destroy communities. When crops flourish and rivers flow at optimal levels, mortals know they have earned Enlil's approval. When droughts parch the fields or floods sweep away entire settlements, they understand that immortal displeasure demands immediate attention through increased offerings, purification rituals, or changes in leadership that have somehow offended cosmic sensibilities. The theological sophistication of this system becomes apparent when comparing it to simpler religious frameworks that rely on single, all-powerful deities. By distributing heavenly authority among multiple specialized powers, this theology can account for the contradictory nature of existence. The same natural forces that bring life also bring death. The same passions that create beauty also generate destruction. The same political institutions that maintain order also enable oppression. Enki, the wise god of fresh water and knowledge, embodies these contradictions most clearly. As the deity who provides the irrigation that makes agriculture possible, he serves as mortality's greatest benefactor. Yet the myths also portray him as a cunning trickster who sometimes defies the commands of higher authorities, saving people from destruction planned by other immortal powers, while also introducing new complications that require constant vigilance and adaptation. The famous tale of the Great Flood illustrates this theological complexity perfectly. When the assembly of deities decides to destroy civilization through a universal deluge, Enki secretly warns the hero, Ziusudra, later known as Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, to build an ark and preserve representatives of all living species. This act of celestial rebellion saves the world from total annihilation. Yet it also establishes a cosmic precedent that immortal will itself can be divided, that even eternal authorities disagree about proper treatment of mortal creatures. The flood narrative, which will later influence Hebrew, Greek, and other mythological traditions, reveals distinctly regional concerns about the relationship between civilization and natural disaster. Unlike later versions that emphasize moral judgment or sacred testing, the original focuses on the practical problems of survival in an environment where catastrophic flooding represents a constant threat. Ziusudra succeeds not through exceptional virtue, but through superior technical knowledge, the ability to construct vessels capable of weathering storms that destroy conventional architecture. This emphasis on ingenuity as the key to survival reflects the pragmatic worldview of peoples who created urban civilization through constant struggle against environmental challenges. The myths celebrate not passive faith or mystical transcendence, but active problem-solving, technological innovation, and social cooperation as the qualities that enable mortals to thrive, despite cosmic indifference to their welfare. Inanna, the goddess of love and conflict, represents perhaps the most psychologically complex figure in the entire pantheon. Neither purely benevolent nor entirely destructive, she embodies the contradictory impulses that drive both individual behavior and historical change. Her domains include sexual passion and armed combat, fertility and political power, artistic inspiration and ruthless ambition, all the forces that make existence simultaneously wonderful and terrible. The Descent of Inanna, one of the world's earliest known literary masterpieces, explores themes that will resonate through every subsequent culture's attempts to understand mortality and meaning. When Inanna travels to the underworld to confront her sister, Ereshkigal, Queen of the Dead, she must surrender all her immortal regalia and submit to the same fate that awaits every mortal creature. Her death plunges the upper world into barrenness and sterility, demonstrating that life and death exist in dynamic tension rather than simple opposition. Only through the intervention of loyal servants and the wisdom of Enki does Inanna return to life, but her resurrection comes at a price. She must provide a substitute to take her place in the realm of the dead, eventually choosing her lover, Dumuzi, whose pastoral contentment has failed to acknowledge the magnitude of her suffering. This cruel, yet somehow just decision establishes the theological foundation for seasonal change. Dumuzi's annual death and rebirth, explaining why vegetation dies in summer heat and returns with winter rains. The myth's exploration of love, betrayal, and sacrifice speaks to universal experiences, while also providing practical explanations for agricultural cycles that determine survival in society. Yet its deeper significance lies in the unflinching examination of mortality's meaning. Unlike religious systems that promise eternal reward for earthly virtue, this theology acknowledges that death comes to all creatures, regardless of their moral standing, that suffering often strikes the innocent while the guilty prosper. That meaning must be created through action, rather than discovered through celestial revelation. The sacred marriage ceremonies that reenact Inanna's relationship with Dumuzi represent civilization's most sophisticated attempt to harmonize individual desire with cosmic necessity. Each year, the ruler or his representative ritually couples with a priestess embodying the goddess, symbolically ensuring that immortal fertility will continue blessing the community's crops and livestock. These elaborate rituals, involving days of preparation, public processions, and ceremonial feasting, demonstrate the central role that sexuality plays in understanding sacred power. Yet the ceremonies also reveal anxieties about the relationship between earthly authority and celestial approval. The ruler who participates in sacred marriage claims intimate connection with eternal powers, but he also accepts responsibility for outcomes beyond mortal control. If the rains fail or the harvest disappoints, religious logic suggests that somehow the sacred union has been improperly performed, that moral or ritual failures have disrupted the cosmic harmony essential for prosperity. This theological framework creates enormous psychological pressure on political leaders, while also providing mechanisms for social change when existing authorities prove inadequate. Popular uprisings against unpopular rulers often invoke religious justifications, claiming that immortal displeasure with corrupt or incompetent leadership requires new representation in the sacred marriage ceremonies that ensure community survival. The Epic of Gilgamesh, emerging gradually from oral traditions during this period, addresses these concerns through the story of a ruler whose extraordinary strength and achievements cannot save him from the universal fate that awaits all mortals. The historical Gilgamesh, who probably ruled Uruk around 2700 BC, becomes in mythological transformation a figure who embodies both the possibilities and limitations of ambition. The epic's opening presents Gilgamesh as a tyrant whose abuse of power alienates his subjects and offends the immortal order. In response to popular complaints, the deities create Enkidu, a wild man who initially lives among animals, but gradually learns civilized behavior through encounters with society. The friendship that develops between these contrasting figures, the over-civilized ruler and the barely domesticated wild man, explores fundamental questions about the relationship between nature and culture, individual desire and social responsibility. Their joint adventures, including the defeat of the monster Humbaba and the slaying of the Bull of Heaven, demonstrate that heroic achievement requires both raw strength and civilized skill, that the greatest accomplishments emerge from cooperation between complementary personalities rather than solitary effort. Yet these victories also generate celestial anger that ultimately leads to Enkidu's death, plunging Gilgamesh into grief that transforms his understanding of existence itself. The epic's final episodes, recounting Gilgamesh's futile quest for immortality, confront directly the questions that torment every consciousness. What happens after death? Can exceptional individuals transcend the limitations that define mortal existence? Is there any ultimate meaning to achievements that time will inevitably erase? The answers the epic provides offer no false comfort, but rather a mature acceptance of finitude combined with affirmation of the values that make limited existence worthwhile. When Gilgamesh finally encounters Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who has achieved immortality, he learns that this celestial gift came through unique historical circumstances that cannot be repeated. The secret of eternal life lies not in magical formulas or heroic deeds, but in accepting one's place within the larger cosmic order, while making the most of opportunities that finite existence provides. The plant of youth that Gilgamesh briefly obtains slips from his grasp, stolen by a serpent while the hero bathes, symbolizing that renewal belongs to natural cycles rather than individual will. The epic concludes not with triumph or tragedy, but with a kind of philosophical resignation that affirms dignity while acknowledging limits. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, understanding that his legacy lies in the monuments he has built, the people he has served, and the wisdom he has gained through suffering. The physical structures of civilization, walls, temples, palaces, will eventually crumble, but the knowledge and values embodied in these achievements continue through cultural transmission that transcends individual mortality. This theological and philosophical framework shapes every aspect of society, from daily religious observances to major political decisions. The concept of me, celestial ordinances that establish proper order in both cosmic and earthly affairs, provides the foundation for law codes, ethical principles, and social institutions that organize community life according to patterns believed to reflect universal truth. The me encompass everything from basic natural phenomena, sunrise and sunset, seasonal change, birth and death, to complex cultural achievements, writing, music, craftsmanship, governance. According to mythological accounts, Inanna steals these immortal ordinances from Enki and brings them to people, explaining both the source of civilized knowledge and the constant struggle required to maintain cultural achievements against forces of chaos and destruction. This myth of cultural transmission through celestial theft reflects sophisticated understanding of the relationship between creativity and cosmic order. Unlike religious systems that attribute all knowledge to direct revelation, this theology recognizes that cultural progress requires active effort, often involving rebellion against conservative authorities who prefer traditional arrangements to innovative solutions. The educational system that preserves and transmits these theological insights operates through the Aduba schools attached to major temples. Here, young scribes learn not only technical skills, but also the literary and religious traditions that define cultural identity. The curriculum includes copying and memorizing ancient myths, hymns, and wisdom literature, alongside practical subjects like mathematics, accounting, and correspondence. These schools produce the intellectual elite who will serve as administrators, judges, priests, and teachers throughout society. Their common educational background creates shared cultural references and values that facilitate communication across political boundaries, while also ensuring that local traditions remain connected to broader regional developments. The literature produced in these educational contexts reveals remarkable psychological sophistication in its exploration of motivation and celestial justice. Texts like The Poem of the Righteous Sufferer, sometimes called The Job of Babylon, examine the problem of undeserved suffering with intellectual honesty that refuses easy theological solutions. The protagonist's anguish at experiencing misfortune despite his careful observance of religious duties reflects genuine spiritual crisis rather than conventional piety. Yet the resolution offered emphasizes acceptance of immortal mystery rather than rational explanation. The sufferer's eventual restoration comes not through understanding why he suffered, but through renewed trust in cosmic justice that operates according to principles beyond mortal comprehension. This theological stance acknowledges the limits of earthly understanding while maintaining faith in ultimate meaning and purpose. The wisdom literature that emerges from these traditions provides practical guidance for daily life, while also addressing philosophical questions about proper behavior. Proverbs and instructional texts offer advice about everything, from business ethics to family relationships, demonstrating that religious insight should influence practical decisions rather than remaining confined to ceremonial contexts. These texts reveal a worldview that values moderation, prudence, and social harmony, while also recognizing that circumstances sometimes require decisive action that challenges conventional expectations. The ideal person combines religious devotion with practical competence, respects traditional authorities while thinking independently about particular problems, and maintains loyalty to community welfare while pursuing legitimate personal interests. As the third millennium draws to a close, this sophisticated theological and philosophical framework has created a remarkably stable cultural foundation that transcends political boundaries and conflicts. Peoples throughout the region and beyond share common mythological references, participate in similar religious observances, and operate according to ethical principles derived from the same ancient sources. Yet this very stability contains the seeds of future challenges. The theological system that explains and justifies existing social arrangements will be tested by historical developments that exceed its explanatory framework. New political realities, technologies, and cultural contacts will require theological innovations that maintain continuity with traditional wisdom while adapting to unprecedented circumstances. The rise of imperial powers, beginning with Lugalzagesi's brief unification and culminating in Sargon's Akkadian Empire, will force fundamental reconsideration of relationships between celestial authority and earthly power. Can traditional deities maintain their cosmic roles when their earthly representatives submit to foreign rulers? How should ancient theological principles adapt to imperial realities that transcend the city-state framework in which they originally developed? These questions will challenge the intellectual and spiritual resources of the civilization that has created the world's first systematic exploration of life's ultimate meaning. The answers that emerge will determine whether this culture can maintain its essential character while adapting to historical changes that threaten to overwhelm traditional institutions and values. Standing before the statue of Nana, as dawn breaks over the ancient metropolis, Enheduanna completes her midnight vigil with words that capture both the glory and fragility of achievement. Her hymns will survive the collapse of empires and the destruction of cities, carrying forward insights about mortality and meaning that speak to universal concerns. Yet she cannot know whether the civilization that has nurtured such wisdom possesses the adaptability necessary to survive the transformations that await it. The myths have been told, the meanings explored, the questions confronted with unflinching honesty. Now comes the test of whether these spiritual and intellectual achievements can guide civilization through challenges that will determine the survival of everything held sacred. The bronze-tipped spear pierces the morning air as Lugalzagesi of Umma surveys the battlefield, where his enemies lie scattered like broken reeds after a storm. Blood darkens the earth around the walls of Lagash, and smoke rises from the burning granaries that once fed his rivals' armies. The year is 2340 BC, and for the first time since the gods scattered kingship among the cities, one man stands poised to unite all of Sumer under a single crown. Behind him, warriors from a dozen conquered settlements kneel in homage to the ruler who has achieved what seemed impossible. Ur has surrendered its ancient independence. Uruk, the first among cities, acknowledges his supremacy. Even proud Nippur, sacred heart of the land, opens its gates to the conqueror, who claims dominion over 50 territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Syrian hills. Yet Lugalzagesi's triumph carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. In the northern city of Kish, a young Semitic official named Sharukin, the king is legitimate, watches these southern victories with calculating eyes. Soon the world will know him by the name Sargon, and his revolution will transform not merely the territorial map of Mesopotamia, but the very nature of royal power itself. The rise of Lugalzagesi represents the logical culmination of centuries of intercity warfare that has gradually eliminated smaller players while concentrating force and economic resources in the hands of increasingly powerful rulers. Unlike previous conquerors who sought tribute or temporary dominance, the Lord of Umma pursues systematic annexation that dissolves traditional boundaries between victors and vanquished. His methods reveal sophisticated understanding of both battlefield strategy and governmental psychology. Rather than simply destroying defeated enemies, Lugalzagesi incorporates their armies into his own forces, their administrators into his bureaucracy, their gods into his religious ceremonies. The result is not conquest, but transformation, the creation of something approaching a unified state that transcends the city-state system that has defined civilization since its beginning. The royal inscription that commemorates his achievements reads like a manifesto for territorial ambition. When Enlil, king of all lands, granted to Lugalzagesi the kingship of the nation, made all lands bow down before him, from the sunrise to the sunset. Then he made straight his path from the lower sea, along the Tigris and Euphrates to the upper sea. From the sunrise to the sunset, Enlil permitted him no rival. This grandiose language masks practical innovations that make unprecedented territorial control possible. Lugalzagesi's administration relies on professional bureaucrats rather than local nobles, standardized legal codes rather than traditional customs, centralized resource allocation rather than autonomous city-state economies. For the first time, merchants can travel from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia under the protection of a single sovereign who guarantees safe passage and uniform commercial regulations. Yet the very scope of these achievements creates vulnerabilities that more traditional rulers avoid. The logistics of controlling territory, stretching across hundreds of miles, strain administrative capabilities that evolved to manage single urban centers. Communication delays mean that provincial unrest can spread unchecked, while central authorities remain ignorant of developing crises. Most dangerously, expansion brings contact with peoples who possess combat technologies and organizational methods that challenge conventional assumptions about warfare and governance. Among these potential threats, none appears more innocuous than the Semitic populations scattered throughout northern Mesopotamia and Syria. Unlike the urbanized southerners, these groups maintain semi-nomadic lifestyles that emphasize mobility and tribal loyalty over territorial control and institutional command. Their languages belong to a different family entirely. Their religious practices focus on different deities, and their social organization operates according to principles that seem primitive compared to the sophisticated bureaucracies of southern cities. Yet appearances deceive. These northern peoples have spent centuries observing innovations while adapting them to their own cultural contexts. They understand cuneiform writing, bronze metallurgy, and agricultural techniques, but they have also preserved combat traditions that urbanized populations have largely abandoned. Their armies combine the discipline and equipment of civilized warfare with the mobility and tactical flexibility that only pastoral societies can maintain. Sargon embodies this cultural synthesis perfectly. Born to Semitic parents in a region where northern dialects predominate, he nevertheless receives a thoroughly Mesopotamian education that includes literacy in the southern script, familiarity with urban administration, and training in the religious and legal traditions that legitimize royal command throughout the region. His name suggests adoption into established society, possibly as a foundling rescued from the river, in circumstances that later legends will elaborate into mythological narratives of divine protection and destined greatness. The historical figure emerges into recorded history as an official in the court of Ur-Zababa, king of Kish, where his responsibilities include oversight of trade networks that connect northern and southern Mesopotamia. This position provides intimate knowledge of both southern wealth and southern vulnerabilities, the economic systems that generate urban prosperity, the formations that protect it, and the divisions that prevent effective coordination among potential defenders. When Lugalzagesi's expansion threatens Kish's independence, Sargon recognizes an opportunity that his more conventional superiors cannot imagine. Rather than accepting subordination to southern leadership or attempting futile resistance with inadequate resources, he proposes a radical alternative: the creation of a new kind of empire that harnesses the combat potential of northern peoples while incorporating the administrative sophistication of established civilization. The coup that brings the young commander to power in Kish unfolds with lightning speed that suggests months of careful preparation. Ur-Zababa disappears from historical records, presumably eliminated by conspirators who understand that half measures invite retaliation. Within weeks, northern forces are marching south under banners that proclaim not merely territorial conquest, but civilizational transformation. The armies that this new leader commands differ fundamentally from anything Lugalzagesi has previously encountered. Instead of citizen militias called up for seasonal campaigns, these are professional soldiers who campaign year-round and maintain loyalty to commanders rather than home cities. Instead of traditional phalanx formations that rely on coordinated movement by heavily armored spearmen, northern tactics emphasize flexibility and rapid maneuver by lighter troops capable of adapting to unexpected circumstances. Most importantly, These forces include substantial numbers of archers equipped with the composite bow, a technological innovation that provides range and penetrating power far superior to simple wooden bows used by most southern armies. These weapons, requiring specialized training to use effectively, give northern forces decisive advantages in open field engagements, where traditional close combat tactics prove inadequate. The confrontation between these contrasting systems occurs somewhere in central Mesopotamia, probably near the ancient boundary between southern and northern cultural spheres. Details of the battle itself vanish into historical obscurity, but the outcome transforms the territorial map of the entire region. Lugalzagesi's empire, constructed through decades of careful conquest, disintegrates in a single afternoon as news of his defeat spreads faster than his fleeing armies. Yet Sargon's victory proves to be only the beginning of a career that will extend northern dominion far beyond anything Lugalzagesi imagined possible. The new emperor possesses not merely superior tactical methods, but also strategic vision that encompasses geographical and cultural horizons that dwarf those of traditional Mesopotamian rulers. Within 5 years of his initial triumph, these forces reach the Mediterranean Sea, establishing tributary relationships with cities whose names appear in cuneiform records for the first time. Expeditions into Anatolia secure access to silver mines and timber resources that Mesopotamian civilization has always required, but never directly controlled. Campaigns into the Zagros Mountains establish dominion over trade routes that connect Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau and Central Asian networks beyond. The speed and scope of these conquests reflect not merely tactical superiority, but also the attraction that northern rule holds for populations who have suffered under traditional methods. Unlike previous conquerors who extracted tribute while leaving local power structures intact, Sargon offers incorporation into a larger system that provides opportunities for advancement, protection from external threats, and access to commercial networks that span the known world. This policy of inclusive expansion proves particularly appealing to merchant classes throughout the region, who discover that unified rule facilitates trade on a scale previously impossible. Standardized weights and measures eliminate the confusion that hampers commercial transactions between different regions. Common legal codes reduce the risks associated with long-distance commerce. Most importantly, central protection extends to trade routes that individual cities could never secure independently. The administrative system that makes this vast empire manageable represents perhaps Sargon's most significant innovation. Rather than attempting to govern directly from his capital, he creates a network of provincial administrators who possess delegated command to handle local affairs while remaining accountable to central oversight. These officials, drawn from both northern and local populations, receive training in bureaucratic methods while maintaining familiarity with regional customs and languages. Communication between the capital and distant provinces relies on an efficient messenger service that can carry urgent dispatches across hundreds of miles in a matter of days. Official correspondence, conducted in both southern and northern scripts, creates documentary records that allow central administrators to monitor provincial activities while providing legal protection for local populations against bureaucratic abuse. Yet the most revolutionary aspect of this system lies in its approach to cultural and religious diversity. Unlike traditional Mesopotamian rulers, who assert the supremacy of their patron deities, the northern emperor presents himself as servant to all the gods worshipped throughout his territories. His royal inscriptions invoke southern deities alongside northern ones. His public ceremonies incorporate religious traditions from conquered territories, and his temple-building projects honor local sacred sites while constructing new monuments to unified rule. This religious syncretism reflects practical calculation as much as personal conviction. By respecting local religious traditions, Sargon eliminates one of the primary sources of resistance that destroyed previous attempts at unification. Priests and temple administrators, who might otherwise organize opposition, instead become stakeholders in success, as northern patronage provides resources for religious activities on a scale that local rulers could never support. The cultural consequences of this policy prove even more significant than the immediate benefits. For the first time, the diverse populations of the Near East begin to participate in a common culture that transcends traditional ethnic and linguistic boundaries. Northern dialects become the language of international diplomacy and commercial correspondence, while Southern script retains its role as the sacred language of religious and scholarly literature. This bilingual literary culture produces innovations that neither tradition could achieve independently. Northern poets adapt Southern mythological themes to express their own cultural values, while traditional scribes incorporate Northern vocabulary and grammatical structures that expand the expressive possibilities of their ancient language. The result is a literary renaissance that produces some of the finest works in both traditions. The successes that make this cultural flowering possible continue throughout Sargon's long reign. Egyptian records mention northern expeditions that reach the eastern Mediterranean, while archaeological evidence suggests trade relationships that extend into the Indus Valley and possibly beyond. The empire that emerges from these conquests encompasses territory larger than any previous state and establishes precedents that will influence organization for millennia. Yet even as achievements reach their zenith, structural problems emerge that will ultimately prove fatal to northern dominance. The very scope of territorial control creates administrative burdens that strain the capabilities of ancient governmental systems. Provincial rebellions become increasingly frequent as local populations discover that benefits cannot compensate for the loss of traditional autonomy. Most ominously, the tactical advantages that originally enabled conquest gradually diffuse to potential enemies who adapt innovations while retaining their own traditions. The reign of Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, illustrates both the possibilities and dangers inherent in power carried to its logical extreme. Unlike his predecessors, who maintained the fiction of ruling through divine appointment, Naram-Sin declares himself an actual god, demanding worship alongside traditional deities and constructing temples dedicated to his own cult. This deification represents the culmination of ideology that gradually transforms successful rulers into divine beings whose command transcends traditional limitations. Naram-Sin's inscriptions describe campaigns conducted not merely for territorial gain or commercial advantage, but for cosmic purposes that involve the fundamental structure of universal order. Yet these grandiose claims prove impossible to sustain when faced with defeats that reveal the mortal limitations of supposedly divine rulers. The invasion of the Gutians, mountain peoples from the Zagros, whose methods prove superior to established forces, destroys the illusion of invincibility while demonstrating that even gods can die when pierced by enemy spears. The collapse unfolds with the same dramatic speed that characterized its creation. Within a generation of Naram-Sin's death, central command disintegrates as provincial governors declare independence, tributary relationships dissolve, and trade networks fragment into competing spheres of influence. The Gutians established dominance over much of Mesopotamia, though their rule proves even more unstable than the system they destroyed. Yet the destruction of northern power does not eliminate the cultural and technological innovations that expansion has spread throughout the Near East. Cuneiform writing continues to serve as the medium for international correspondence, long after the scribes who developed its diplomatic applications have vanished into historical obscurity. Artistic motifs and architectural techniques pioneered during this period influenced construction projects in regions that never directly experienced northern rule. Most significantly, the concept of universal empire survives the collapse of its first successful embodiment, inspiring future rulers who dream of recreating these achievements while avoiding the mistakes that led to destruction. The memory of unified rule becomes an ideal that will motivate conquerors throughout subsequent history, from the Neo-Assyrian emperors who will reunify Mesopotamia 7 centuries later, to Alexander the Great's vision of a world empire that synthesizes Greek and Oriental traditions. For the Southerners themselves, this period represents both catastrophe and opportunity. The destruction of their independence eliminates the city-state system that has defined their civilization since its origins. Yet northern patronage also supports cultural achievements that surpass anything accomplished during the period of fragmentation. The synthesis of southern learning with northern innovation produces intellectual and artistic works that represent the highest expression of Mesopotamian civilization. As the third millennium draws to a close amid the chaos of collapse and barbarian invasion, the future of ancient culture hangs in the balance. Can a people who have lost their independence maintain their cultural identity? Will the institutions and traditions that created the world's first civilization survive the challenges of foreign rule and social upheaval? The answers to these questions await the emergence of new leaders who must balance innovation with tradition, territorial ambition with local loyalty, cultural continuity with historical adaptation. The age of city-states has ended forever, destroyed by forces that its own innovations made possible. The age of empires has begun, bringing possibilities and dangers that will test the resilience of every achievement that Mesopotamian civilization has accomplished. In this transformed world, survival requires not merely strength or economic prosperity, but the ability to adapt ancient wisdom to unprecedented circumstances, while preserving the essential values that make civilization worth defending. The revolution is complete. Now comes the far more difficult task of learning to live with its consequences. In the shadow of Ur's ancient ziggurat, Ur-Namma kneels before the moon, god Nana, as dawn breaks over a world transformed by chaos. The year is 2112 BC, and the proud descendant of fishermen and date farmers prepares to accept a crown that will restore glory to a civilization that seemed destined for extinction. Around him, the remnants of Sumer's greatest cities lie scarred by decades of barbarian occupation, their temples desecrated, their libraries scattered, their people reduced to servitude under foreign masters who speak harsh mountain dialects and worship alien gods. Yet today marks the beginning of resurrection. The Gutian warlords who carved up the corpse of the Northern Empire have grown complacent in their stolen palaces, their tribal feuds creating opportunities that patient observers have been waiting generations to exploit. Ur-Namma has spent 20 years building alliances among the scattered nobility of the south, learning the lessons of previous failures while preparing for the moment when united action might restore independence to the land between the rivers. The Gutian collapse unfolds with startling swiftness once the first blow falls. These mountain warriors, formidable in conquest, proving capable of governing the complex urban societies they have dominated through fear alone. Their kings squabble over tribute rights while their followers drift back to highland strongholds, leaving administrative chaos in territories that require constant attention to irrigation systems, trade networks, and religious observances that maintain social order. Ur-Namma strikes when Gutian attention focuses on internecine warfare in the northern territories. His forces, disciplined veterans trained in traditional formations, but equipped with innovations learned during the occupation, sweep through the southern cities like floodwater, breaking through weakened dikes. Within 6 months, the banners of fly over settlements that have not known native rule for nearly a century. Yet military victory represents only the beginning of challenges that will determine whether this restoration proves permanent or merely another cycle in the endless alternation between order and chaos that has characterized Mesopotamian history. Ur-Namma understands that lasting success requires more than battlefield triumph. It demands the reconstruction of institutions, traditions, and cultural achievements that foreign occupation has damaged or destroyed. The new monarch's first priority involves restoring the irrigation systems that make urban civilization possible in this arid landscape. Decades of neglect under barbarian rule have allowed canals to silt up, dikes to crumble, and regulatory mechanisms to fall into disrepair. Without immediate attention to hydraulic infrastructure, even the most brilliant cultural renaissance will collapse when the next drought reduces agricultural productivity below subsistence levels. The massive public works projects that Ur-Namma initiates dwarf anything attempted by previous rulers in their scope and sophistication. Teams of engineers survey hundreds of miles of waterways, calculating optimal gradients and designing distribution systems that will serve both agricultural and urban needs. Thousands of laborers, volunteers, conscripts, and purchased captives dig new channels while repairing ancient ones according to specifications that reflect centuries of accumulated hydraulic knowledge. These construction projects serve multiple purposes beyond their immediate practical benefits. They provide employment for populations displaced by years of warfare and occupation, creating economic stability that allows normal social relationships to resume. They demonstrate royal commitment to public welfare rather than merely personal aggrandizement, building popular support for the restored dynasty. Most importantly, they establish visible symbols of renewed prosperity that attract merchants, craftsmen, and scholars from throughout the region. The legal reforms that accompany physical reconstruction prove even more significant for long-term stability. Ur-Namma's law code, carved in stone and displayed in public spaces throughout his kingdom, represents humanity's earliest systematic attempt to establish justice through written statutes rather than arbitrary royal decree. Unlike the crude vengeance systems practiced by barbarian occupiers, these laws distinguish between different categories of offenses, while prescribing punishments that reflect both the severity of crimes and the social status of those involved. The code's preamble reveals sophisticated understanding of the relationship between legal order and divine approval. After An and Enlil had turned over the kingship of Ur to Nanna, at that time I, Ur-Namma, son born of Ninsun, for my beloved mother who bore me, in accordance with his true word, did build the temple of Enlil in Nippur. I built the wall of Ur. I restored the ways of the land in equity. This language emphasizes that royal lawgiving serves cosmic purposes rather than merely human convenience. By establishing justice according to divine principles, the monarch ensures that earthly society reflects heavenly order, creating stability that transcends the limitations of individual rulers or particular historical circumstances. The specific provisions of the code reveal remarkable sophistication in their treatment of economic relationships, family obligations, and social hierarchy. Commercial regulations protect both merchants and customers from fraud while establishing standardized procedures for conducting business transactions. Marriage and inheritance laws balance individual rights against family interests, while providing mechanisms for resolving disputes that might otherwise fragment communities. Criminal statutes distinguish between intentional and accidental offenses, while recognizing that different social classes merit different treatment under law. Perhaps most remarkably, the code establishes monetary compensation rather than physical retribution as the preferred remedy for most offenses. Unlike the eye for an eye principle that will characterize later legal systems, Ur-Namma's statutes emphasize restoration over revenge, recognizing that community welfare benefits more from restitution than from additional violence that merely perpetuates cycles of conflict. These legal innovations prove particularly important for governing the multi-ethnic population that characterizes the Third Society. Decades of foreign occupation have created complex relationships between native populations, assimilated barbarians, imported slaves, and immigrant communities attracted by economic opportunities. Traditional tribal justice systems cannot handle disputes that cross ethnic boundaries, while royal arbitrary decisions create precedents that may prove impossible to sustain consistently. Written law codes provide solutions that transcend cultural differences while maintaining enough flexibility to adapt to local circumstances. Provincial administrators can resolve disputes according to established principles rather than personal preference, creating predictable legal environments that encourage commercial investment and population settlement. Appeals to higher courts ensure that local prejudices cannot completely override royal intentions, while acknowledging regional variations in custom and practice. The administrative system that implements these legal reforms represents perhaps Ur-Namma's most enduring innovation. Rather than relying on traditional noble families, whose loyalty may prove unreliable, the restored monarchy creates a professional bureaucracy recruited through examination systems that test competence rather than inherited status. These officials receive training in law, mathematics, record-keeping, and religious observance that prepares them for responsibilities that span both secular and sacred domains. The educational institutions that produce this administrative elite undergo complete reconstruction during the early years of restoration. Scribal schools that survived barbarian occupation as underground institutions emerged to establish curricula that combine traditional learning with practical skills needed for governing complex societies. Students master not only the classical texts that preserve ancient wisdom, but also contemporary techniques for surveying land, calculating taxes, managing warehouses, and conducting diplomatic correspondence. This educational renaissance produces literary and scholarly achievements that surpass even the greatest accomplishments of earlier periods. Scribes working in palace and temple scriptoria collect, edit, and preserve texts that might otherwise vanish into historical obscurity. Their efforts create standardized versions of ancient myths, hymns, and epic poems that establish canonical forms for literary works that will influence writing throughout the ancient world. The Epic of Gilgamesh receives its classic formulation during this period, as editors weave together various regional traditions into a unified narrative that explores universal themes through distinctly Mesopotamian cultural perspectives. Similarly, creation myths, flood stories, and divine genealogies achieve the forms in which they will be transmitted to later civilizations, carrying forward theological and philosophical insights that represent the mature expression of humanity's earliest systematic religious thinking. Yet the the Renaissance extends far beyond literary preservation to include original compositions that address contemporary concerns through traditional literary forms. Court poets produce works that celebrate royal achievements while also examining the moral obligations that accompany political power. Religious writers explore theological questions raised by recent historical experiences, particularly the problem of divine justice in a world where foreign barbarians can temporarily triumph over civilized peoples who maintain proper relationships with traditional deities. The architectural projects that symbolize this cultural flowering surpass previous achievements in both scale and sophistication. Ur-Namma's ziggurat at Ur, rising over 60 meters above the surrounding plain, becomes the largest religious structure yet constructed in Mesopotamia. Its staged terraces, connected by ceremonial staircases and decorated with elaborate architectural ornamentation, create a visual symbol of restored glory that can be seen for miles across the delta landscape. Construction of this massive monument requires organizational capabilities that demonstrate the administrative sophistication of the restored state. Engineers coordinate the work of thousands of laborers while managing supply chains that bring materials from quarries hundreds of miles away. Architects design structural systems capable of supporting enormous weight while creating interior spaces suitable for religious ceremonies that involve hundreds of participants. Artists develop decorative programs that communicate theological messages through visual imagery, comprehensible to both literate and illiterate audiences. The economic foundation that supports these cultural achievements rests on commercial innovations that surpass anything attempted by previous governments. Third administrators create the world's first systematic approach to state-controlled economic planning, with central authorities coordinating production, distribution, and consumption across the entire kingdom. This system, revealed through tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets discovered in palace and temple archives, demonstrates organizational complexity that rivals modern corporate structures in its scope and sophistication. The famous redistribution center at Drehem illustrates the scale and efficiency of this planned economy. Located strategically between major cities, this facility receives livestock tribute from throughout the kingdom, processes animals for ritual sacrifice and secular consumption, and distributes meat products according to carefully calculated schedules that ensure adequate supplies for religious festivals, royal ceremonies, and administrative personnel. Records show that Drehem handles hundreds of thousands of cattle, sheep, and goats annually, requiring logistical coordination that involves transportation, storage, processing, and distribution operations spanning the entire agricultural calendar. Similar centralized management extends to other economic sectors. Textile production, metalworking, pottery manufacture, and agricultural processing operate according to state plans that allocate resources, assign quotas, and distribute finished products based on governmental priorities rather than market mechanisms. This system eliminates the inefficiencies and inequalities that characterize purely commercial economies, while ensuring that essential goods remain available even during periods of environmental stress or external threat. Yet the very success of this planned economy creates vulnerabilities that will ultimately contribute to the dynasty's collapse. The administrative burden of managing such complex systems strains governmental capabilities, particularly when external pressures reduce available resources or disrupt transportation networks. More fundamentally, the system's dependence on central coordination makes the entire kingdom vulnerable to leadership failures or communication breakdowns that might have only local effects in more decentralized economies. The reign of Ur-Namma's son, Shulgi, illustrates both the possibilities and limitations inherent in this approach to governance. Ascending the throne in 2094 BC, Shulgi inherits a kingdom that has achieved remarkable stability and prosperity under his father's reforms. His 48-year reign witnesses the culmination of the cultural and economic achievements that define the Ur-Thre Renaissance. Yet it also reveals structural problems that will prove impossible to resolve within existing institutional frameworks. Shulgi's early years focus on consolidating and extending his father's innovations, rather than introducing fundamental changes to governmental systems that appear to function effectively. He completes major construction projects begun during the previous reign, while initiating new ones that demonstrate royal commitment to public welfare and divine service. His road-building programs create the first systematic transportation network in history, with maintained highways connecting major cities and way stations, providing security and supply services for official travelers. These infrastructure improvements facilitate commercial growth that exceeds all previous achievements. Merchants can travel safely between distant markets while carrying larger quantities of goods than ever before possible. Standardized weights, measures, and currency systems eliminate confusion that hampered earlier trade relationships. Most importantly, royal protection extends to commercial activities across the entire kingdom, reducing risks that traditionally required substantial profit margins to justify long-distance ventures. The cultural achievements of Shulgi's middle years represent the pinnacle of literary and artistic accomplishment. Palace schools produce scholars whose mathematical, astronomical, and linguistic expertise surpasses anything achieved by previous civilizations. The king himself receives literary education that enables him to compose hymns and poems whose technical sophistication demonstrates the high level of cultural refinement that characterizes the court. These royal compositions, celebrating both personal achievements and cosmic themes, establish precedents for ruler poets that will influence literary traditions throughout the ancient world. Yet the later years of Shulgi's reign reveal growing problems that administrative efficiency cannot resolve. Climate change reduces agricultural productivity throughout the region, straining resource allocation systems that depend on predictable surpluses. Population growth outpaces economic expansion, creating social tensions that challenge traditional mechanisms for maintaining order. Most ominously, external pressures increase as nomadic peoples displaced by environmental changes begin migrating toward Mesopotamian territories that offer greater security and prosperity. The Amorite invasions that eventually destroy the Ur III state begin as gradual infiltration rather than dramatic conquest. These Semitic nomads, driven from traditional grazing areas by drought and competing tribal pressures, initially seek employment as mercenaries, laborers, and trading partners rather than territorial control. Their assimilation into existing social structures proceeds peacefully enough that royal administrators view them as assets rather than threats. Yet demographic change gradually alters the ethnic and cultural composition of the kingdom in ways that undermine traditional institutions. Amorite settlers bring different languages, religious practices, and social customs that challenge the homogeneity essential for centralized administration. Their tribal loyalties compete with royal allegiance, creating alternative centers of authority that fragment the unified command structure on which the planned economy depends. The death of Shulgi in 2047 BC marks the beginning of accelerated decline, as his successors prove incapable of adapting governmental systems to changing circumstances. Amar-Sin and Shu-Sin attempt to maintain traditional policies, despite clear evidence that external conditions require fundamental innovations. Their rigid adherence to established procedures reflects both conservative institutional culture and genuine uncertainty about alternatives that might preserve essential achievements while adapting to new realities. The final collapse comes with devastating swiftness during the reign of Ibbi-Sin, as multiple crises converge to overwhelm administrative capabilities that have functioned effectively for over a century. Amorite pressure intensifies beyond the kingdom's capacity to absorb or resist, while Elamite invasions from the east exploit internal divisions that foreign occupation has created. Environmental degradation compounds these political challenges, as soil salinization reduces agricultural productivity in core territories that must support both traditional populations and recent immigrants. The fall of Ur in 2004 BC represents more than mere political transition. It marks the end of the last period of native rule that Sumer will ever experience. The lament literature that commemorates this catastrophe expresses grief that transcends immediate political concerns to encompass the destruction of cultural achievements that will never be fully restored. The lament for Ur captures the magnitude of loss in language that resonates across millennia. O my city attacked without cause. O my city attacked and destroyed. O my city that exists no more. The day that came to be for my city, that day of storm, destructive of all things. That day that came to be for me, that day when my city was destroyed. Yet even as political independence vanishes forever, the cultural legacy of the Ur III Renaissance ensures that essential elements of the civilization will survive under foreign rule. The legal codes, literary works, architectural techniques, and administrative methods developed during this final flowering influence subsequent developments throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. Future empires will adopt and adapt to these innovations, while lacking the cultural context that gave them their original meaning and power. The educational systems that produced the Renaissance's intellectual achievements continue functioning under new rulers who recognize their practical value despite their foreign cultural associations. Scribal schools preserve and transmit textual traditions that maintain continuity with the past, while gradually adapting to contemporary needs. This cultural persistence ensures that the wisdom accumulated over 3 millennia of urban civilization will continue shaping human development long after the political structures that created it have vanished into historical memory. Standing in the ruins of Ur's great ziggurat as enemy soldiers systematically loot its treasures, the last priests of Nana perform final rituals that they know will never be repeated. Their prayers acknowledge defeat while also expressing faith that the gods will eventually restore justice to a world temporarily dominated by chaos and barbarism. They cannot know that their civilization's greatest achievements will outlive every empire that conquers it, that the ideas and institutions they have created will influence human development until the end of recorded history. The Sumerian Renaissance has ended, but its legacy has only begun to unfold across the vast expanse of human possibility that stretches ahead into an unknowable future. The final chapter of political independence closes, yet the eternal chapter of cultural influence opens toward horizons that the creators of humanity's first civilization could never have imagined. The acrid smoke of burning archives drifts across Ur's sacred precinct as Kindatu the Elamite surveys his latest conquest. Clay tablets that preserve 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom crackle in the flames, their cuneiform signs dissolving into ash that the desert wind scatters like memories of a dream. The year is 2004 BC, and the last king of the Third Dynasty lies dead in his palace, his dreams of restoration extinguished along with the independence of the people who gave civilization to the world. Yet even as foreign boots trample the courtyards where Ur-Namma once proclaimed his law code, the seeds of transformation are already sprouting in territories that seem too remote to matter. Along the middle Euphrates, in towns whose names mean nothing to Elamite conquerors, Amorite chieftains are learning to govern settled populations rather than merely raid them. These desert nomads, dismissed as barbarians by the sophisticated administrators of fallen carry within their tribal memories the organizational skills and adaptive intelligence that will reshape civilization according to new patterns. The collapse of native rule unfolds through environmental catastrophe as much as foreign invasion. The irrigation systems that transformed southern regions into the world's first urban heartland have been poisoning themselves for generations through processes that even the most skilled engineers cannot reverse. Millennia of intensive agriculture have raised salt levels in previously fertile soils until barley yields drop below subsistence requirements despite normal rainfall and careful cultivation. The technical term that modern scientists use, salinization, cannot capture the human tragedy that unfolds as farming communities watch their ancestral fields turn white with mineral deposits that make plant growth impossible. Families that have worked the same plots for 20 generations abandon settlements that their great-grandfathers founded, joining streams of environmental refugees who seek sustenance in territories already strained by population pressure and resource scarcity. These internal migrations create social tensions that existing governmental structures prove incapable of managing. The centralized administrative system that functioned efficiently during periods of stable productivity breaks down when faced with demographic chaos that requires rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Bureaucrats trained to allocate predetermined quotas among established communities cannot devise solutions for problems that exceed all previous experience and conventional expertise. The Amorite infiltration that earlier generations absorbed without serious disruption accelerates into mass migration as environmental degradation in Syria and the Arabian Peninsula forces entire tribal confederations to seek new territories. Unlike previous nomadic incursions that involved relatively small groups seeking temporary grazing rights, this movement includes whole peoples who intend permanent settlement in regions that offer better prospects for survival and prosperity. The social transformation that results cannot be contained within traditional categories of conquest and resistance. Many Amorite groups arrive not as invaders, but as allies, mercenaries, and trading partners whose services existing rulers desperately need. Their mobility and military skills prove invaluable for defending settled territories against other nomadic groups, while their commercial networks provide access to resources that traditional supply systems can no longer guarantee. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the ethnic composition of society shifts until Amorite names appear regularly in administrative records, religious personnel lists, and commercial documents. These newcomers adapt to urban life with remarkable speed, learning cuneiform writing, adopting local religious practices, and intermarrying with established families in ways that create hybrid traditions, combining nomadic and sedentary elements. Yet adaptation flows in both directions as settled populations discover that Amorite social organization offers advantages that traditional institutions cannot provide. Tribal kinship networks prove more flexible than bureaucratic hierarchies when dealing with unprecedented challenges. Oral legal traditions adapt more readily to changing circumstances than written codes that reflect historical conditions rather than contemporary needs. Most importantly, nomadic leadership methods prove more effective at coordinating diverse groups than administrative systems designed for homogeneous populations. The rise of Babylon exemplifies this synthesis at its most successful. Founded as a minor settlement on the Euphrates sometime during the Thrudi period, the town achieves prominence only when Amorite rulers recognize its strategic potential as a center for controlling trade routes between northern and southern regions. Under Sumu Abum, the first of the Amorite dynasty that will dominate the area for 3 centuries, Babylon begins its transformation from provincial outpost to imperial capital. The early Babylonian kings pursue territorial expansion through methods that combine traditional administrative techniques with nomadic military innovations. Their armies include both disciplined infantry formations inherited from earlier periods and mobile cavalry units that reflect pastoral military traditions. Their governments employ both written law codes and oral customary practices, both centralized bureaucracies and decentralized tribal authorities. This hybrid approach proves remarkably effective at managing the ethnic and religious diversity that characterizes the post-city-state era. Rather than attempting to impose uniform standards on diverse populations, Babylonian administration accommodates local variations while maintaining overall coordination through flexible institutional arrangements. The result is a political system that achieves stability through adaptation rather than rigid control. The economic policies that emerge from this synthesis demonstrate sophisticated understanding of commercial relationships that span both sedentary and nomadic societies. Babylonian merchants established trading networks that extend from Egyptian markets to Central Asian sources, utilizing both urban commercial techniques and nomadic transportation capabilities. Their contracts reveal legal sophistication that protects participants while accommodating the practical requirements of long-distance trade across diverse territories. Yet the most significant innovation involves language policy that reflects the changed linguistic landscape of the region. While maintaining the ancient tongue as the sacred language of religious and scholarly literature, Babylonian administration conducts daily business in Akkadian dialects that have evolved through contact with Amorite languages. This bilingual approach preserves intellectual continuity with the past, while acknowledging demographic realities that make linguistic adaptation necessary for effective governance. The legal achievements that crown this synthesis receive their classic expression in the Code of Hammurabi, promulgated around 1750 BC, after nearly 2 centuries of institutional experimentation. This comprehensive law code represents the culmination of legal development, incorporating ancient precedents, northern innovations, and Amorite customary practices into a unified system that addresses the practical needs of a multi-ethnic society. The code's prologue reveals sophisticated understanding of the relationship between law and social order. When Marduk commanded me to provide just ways for the people of the land and to make them have good governance, I set forth truth and justice throughout the land and promoted the welfare of the people. This language emphasizes that royal law-giving serves divine purposes, while also acknowledging practical obligations to ensure that legal systems actually improve human welfare, rather than merely preserving traditional privileges. The specific provisions demonstrate remarkable attention to commercial relationships, family obligations, property rights, and criminal justice that reflect centuries of legal evolution. Commercial regulations protect both merchants and customers, while establishing procedures for resolving disputes that arise from long-distance trade involving multiple legal jurisdictions. Family law balances individual rights against kinship obligations, while providing mechanisms for adapting to changing social circumstances. Property regulations protect private ownership, while acknowledging community interests that require periodic redistribution of resources. Perhaps most significantly, the code establishes graduated punishments that reflect both the severity of offenses and the social status of those involved, creating a legal hierarchy that mirrors the complex social stratification of Babylonian society. Unlike earlier systems that applied uniform penalties regardless of social context, Hammurabi's code recognizes that effective justice must account for the different roles and responsibilities that characterize hierarchical societies. These legal innovations influenced judicial systems throughout the ancient world, providing models for later law codes that will govern Greek city-states, Roman territories, and medieval European kingdoms. The principle that written law should reflect moral principles rather than merely royal preferences becomes a foundation for legal thinking that persists until the present day. Yet even as Babylonian civilization achieves its greatest institutional successes, the underlying demographic and environmental trends that destroyed independence continue operating with inexorable logic. The agricultural foundation of prosperity proves incapable of supporting the population densities that urban civilization requires, without creating ecological damage that ultimately undermines the entire system. Archaeological evidence reveals the scale of environmental degradation that accompanies the transition from native to Babylonian hegemony. Settlement patterns shift northward as southern territories become increasingly difficult to cultivate, despite massive investments in irrigation technology and soil restoration projects. Urban populations decline dramatically in traditionally prosperous regions, while new centers emerge in areas that offer better agricultural prospects. These environmental challenges intersect with continuing nomadic pressures to create security problems that strain the military and administrative capabilities of settled governments. The Kassite invasions that begin during Hammurabi's later years represent a new phase of nomadic expansion, involving peoples whose military technologies and organizational methods surpass those of previous tribal confederations. Unlike earlier nomadic groups that sought incorporation into existing societies, the Kassites pursue territorial conquest that aims at replacing established governments with tribal authorities, responsible primarily to kinship groups rather than territorial populations. Their success depends partly on military innovations, particularly horse-drawn chariots that provide mobility and striking power unprecedented in regional warfare, but also on political organization that proves more adaptable than traditional bureaucratic structures. The gradual Kassite conquest of Babylonia unfolds over several generations through processes that combine military pressure with peaceful infiltration, diplomatic negotiation with economic penetration. Rather than destroying existing institutions, Kassite rulers adapt administrative methods to serve tribal objectives, while preserving enough continuity to maintain legitimacy among settled populations. This pattern of nomadic conquest, followed by institutional adaptation, becomes the standard model for political change throughout later history. Each successive wave of invaders, Kassites, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Persians, initially threatens to destroy existing civilization, but ultimately adopts and modifies inherited institutions rather than creating entirely new ones. The linguistic consequences of these repeated conquests gradually transform the intellectual identity of regional civilization. The ancient tongue disappears as a spoken language sometime during the early second millennium, surviving only as the sacred script of religious and scholarly literature. Akkadian evolves through contact with successive waves of Semitic and Indo-European languages, until it becomes increasingly distant from its classical forms. New languages, Aramaic, Persian, Greek, eventually replace older ones as the media of daily communication and commercial correspondence. Yet intellectual persistence proves stronger than political continuity, as traditions established during the earliest period continue influencing human development long after their original social contexts have vanished. The Epic of Gilgamesh survives in Akkadian, Hittite, and other translations that carry its themes of friendship, mortality, and meaning. to societies that have no direct connection with ancient urban civilization. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge developed in the first schools provides the foundation for scientific traditions that will eventually influence Greek, Islamic, and European scholars. The sexagesimal number system that divides hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees preserves mathematical insights in contemporary measurement systems that users employ without awareness of their ancient origins. Legal principles, established in early law codes and refined in Babylonian legislation, influenced jurisprudence throughout the ancient world and beyond. The concept that law should reflect moral principles rather than merely royal convenience, that justice requires consistent application of established standards rather than arbitrary personal decisions, that punishment should fit crimes rather than simply demonstrating power. These ideas originate in legal thinking and spread throughout subsequent legal traditions. Religious concepts developed in ancient theology continue shaping human understanding of divine-human relationships long after the gods of the region have been forgotten by all but scholars. The idea that cosmic order requires moral behavior, that earthly events reflect heavenly justice, that human beings bear responsibility for maintaining harmony between divine and mundane realms. These theological insights appear in modified forms throughout later religious traditions. Most profoundly, the urban civilization that the earliest peoples created becomes the dominant model for human social organization, despite the environmental and demographic challenges that destroyed its original manifestation. The concept that large populations can live together peacefully through institutional coordination, that specialized occupations can create prosperity through cooperative exchange, that intellectual achievements can transcend individual lifespans through deliberate preservation and transmission. These civilizational insights survive every political catastrophe and continue guiding human development into the contemporary era. The memory of ancient achievement persists in mythological and literary traditions that celebrate the wisdom and prosperity of early times, while acknowledging that such achievements remain vulnerable to forces beyond human control. The biblical account of the Tower of Babel, with its themes of technological ambition and divine judgment, reflects folk memories of ziggurat construction and urban civilization that seem to challenge the natural order itself. Similarly, flood narratives that appear in diverse traditions preserve memories of environmental catastrophes that periodically devastated societies, while also expressing faith that human ingenuity and divine mercy can ensure survival even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. These stories carry forward practical wisdom about adaptation and resilience that remains relevant for contemporary societies facing their own environmental and demographic pressures. As the second millennium BC progresses and new empires arise to claim dominion over these territories, the direct succession from earliest civilization becomes increasingly difficult to trace through political and administrative continuities. Yet the indirect influence spreads ever more widely as traders, scholars, and refugees carry innovations to distant regions where they take root in different soils and produce hybrid achievements that combine ancient wisdom with local innovations. The Phoenician merchants who established trading networks throughout the Mediterranean carry alphabetic writing systems derived ultimately from cuneiform. The Hebrew scribes who compile their people's sacred traditions incorporate literary themes and theological concepts that originated in the earliest religious thinking. The Greek philosophers who lay the foundations for Western intellectual traditions build upon mathematical and astronomical knowledge that scholars preserved and transmitted across boundaries. In this way, the civilization that seemed to end with the fall of Ur and the rise of foreign dynasties actually achieves a kind of immortality through intellectual diffusion that transcends political boundaries and ethnic identities. The ideas and institutions that the first urbanites created continue evolving through contact with new environments and different human experiences, generating innovations that their original creators could never have anticipated, while preserving essential insights that remain valid across vast expanses of time and social change. Standing in the ruins of Babylon as yet another conquering army claims dominion over the land between the rivers, a thoughtful observer might recognize that endings and beginnings interweave in patterns too complex for simple historical narrative. The civilization that began in the marshes of the south has died and been reborn so many times that death and resurrection seem to be its essential characteristics rather than mere historical accidents. Perhaps this is the deepest wisdom that early experience offers to later ages, that human achievements worthy of preservation will survive the destruction of the particular forms through which they first find expression, that social evolution operates according to principles more durable than political power or military conquest, that the ideas and values capable of serving universal human needs will eventually transcend the limitations of their original historical contexts to become permanent elements of human civilization itself. The first urbanites are gone forever, yet everything they accomplished of lasting value remains eternally present in the ongoing human adventure of creating meaning and order from the chaos of natural existence. Their story ends where all true stories must, not with conclusion, but with transformation, not with death, but with continuing life that honors the past while embracing an unknowable but hopeful future. In the dusty archive chambers beneath Ashurbanipal's palace at Nineveh, scribes labor by lamplight to preserve treasures more precious than gold or lapis lazuli. The year is 650 BC, and the last great Assyrian king has commanded his scholars to gather the wisdom of ages from every corner of his empire. Clay tablets bearing cuneiform signs flow into the royal library like tributaries feeding a mighty river. Epic poems from Babylon, astronomical observations from Uruk, mathematical treatises from Nippur, medical texts from Sippar. Among these countless documents lie the literary masterpieces that a vanished people created 2 millennia earlier in the marshlands where civilization initially took root. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the descent of Inanna, the creation myths that explained how gods shaped the world from primordial chaos, all preserved in careful copies that will carry forward the spiritual and intellectual achievements of humanity's earliest society, long after the last person who could speak their language has returned to dust. The Assyrian scribes who catalogue these texts cannot know they are creating the world's inaugural Great Library, an institution that will inspire similar projects from Alexandria to Baghdad, from medieval monasteries to modern universities. They only understand that their sovereign has commanded them to gather all knowledge, and they obey with the thoroughness that has made Assyrian administration the most efficient the world has yet seen. When Nineveh falls to Babylonian and Median forces in 612 BC, the flames that consume Ashurbanipal's palace bake the clay tablets in his library to ceramic hardness, inadvertently ensuring their survival for modern archaeologists who will rediscover them 25 centuries later. In this accidental preservation lies a perfect symbol of how ideas outlive the civilizations that create them, finding new life in contexts their original authors could never have imagined. The cuneiform writing system that makes this preservation possible represents perhaps the most enduring innovation that emerged from the Mesopotamian experiment in settled living. From its humble origins as an accounting method for temple granaries, the wedge-shaped script evolves into a flexible medium capable of recording everything from royal correspondence to love poetry, from mathematical calculations to philosophical speculation. The spread of cuneiform throughout the ancient Near East creates the world's initial international system of written communication. Diplomatic archives from sites as distant as Amarna in Egypt and Kanesh in Anatolia reveal correspondence conducted in Akkadian script that derives ultimately from these southern innovations. Kings who speak mutually incomprehensible languages exchange treaties written in characters so that temple administrators developed to record barley rations and livestock inventories. This linguistic legacy extends far beyond the script itself to influence the development of alphabetic writing systems that will eventually replace cuneiform throughout most of the ancient world. The Phoenician merchants who create the ancestors of modern alphabets draw inspiration from simplified cuneiform signs, while Hebrew scribes adapt Mesopotamian literary techniques to record their own people's sacred traditions. Even Greek poetry shows structural influences that can be traced back to ancient hymns and epic compositions. The mathematical achievements that early schools pioneered continue shaping understanding of numerical relationships in ways that remain visible in contemporary measurement systems. The sexagesimal notation that divides circles into 360 degrees and hours into 60 minutes preserves computational methods that Mesopotamian mathematicians developed over 4 millennia ago. Modern trigonometry, astronomy, and navigation still rely on angular measurements that reflect these mathematical insights. The positional notation system that makes complex calculations possible emerges from experiments with place value arithmetic. Their tablets reveal sophisticated understanding of quadratic equations, geometric progressions, and algebraic relationships that anticipate mathematical discoveries attributed to much later civilizations. The Pythagorean theorem, often considered a Greek innovation, appears in mathematical exercises centuries before Pythagoras was born. These mathematical traditions influence scientific development throughout the ancient world and beyond. Babylonian astronomers, building on southern foundations, create observational records that Greek scientists will later use to develop theoretical models of planetary motion. Islamic mathematicians preserve and extend Mesopotamian computational techniques that European scholars will rediscover during the Renaissance. Even today, the precise astronomical observations recorded on clay tablets provide data that helps modern scientists understand long-term climate patterns and celestial mechanics. The legal innovations that began with Ur-Namma's code and reached mature expression in Hammurabi's legislation establish principles that continue governing societies despite countless political transformations. The concept that law should serve justice rather than merely expressing royal will becomes a foundational assumption for legal systems throughout the ancient world. The idea that written statutes should provide predictable standards for resolving disputes creates expectations about governmental accountability that survive every change of dynasty or political system. The specific legal mechanisms that Mesopotamian law codes developed, contracts, property rights, inheritance procedures, commercial regulations, spread throughout the ancient world through trade networks and diplomatic contacts. Roman law, which provides the foundation for most European legal traditions, incorporates principles and procedures that can be traced back to these legal innovations. Modern concepts of due process, proportional punishment, and legal equality emerge from intellectual traditions that Mesopotamian judges and legal scholars established. The religious and mythological legacy proves even more pervasive, as theological concepts influence belief systems that reach every corner of civilization. The flood narratives that appear in traditions as diverse as Hebrew scripture, Greek mythology, and Hindu sacred literature all derive ultimately from Mesopotamian sources that preserve folk memories of actual environmental catastrophes that periodically devastated early settlements. The creation myths that explain how divine powers shape the world from primordial chaos provide templates for cosmological thinking that appear in modified forms throughout later religious traditions. The Babylonian Enuma Elish, which builds directly on southern theological foundations, influences Hebrew creation accounts, Greek theogonies, and various other mythological systems that attempt to explain the origins and structure of the universe. Even more significant are the ethical and philosophical insights embedded in ancient religious literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh explores themes of friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning that transcend any particular religious or philosophical tradition. Its meditation on the relationship between civilization and nature, the inevitability of death, and the importance of leaving lasting achievements speaks to universal concerns that remain as relevant today as they were 5,000 years ago. The settlement planning principles that early architects developed in their initial experiments with city living establish patterns that continue governing community design throughout subsequent history. The concept of organizing settlements around central religious and administrative complexes provides a template that appears in civilizations as distant as Maya Mesoamerica and Angkor, Cambodia. The integration of residential, commercial, and industrial districts within defensive walls creates forms that remain recognizable in medieval European towns and traditional Islamic cities. The technological innovations that made Mesopotamian civilization possible continue influencing development in ways both obvious and subtle. The wheel, which revolutionizes transportation and pottery production, becomes so fundamental to technology that its invention is synonymous with civilizational progress. The plow transforms agriculture throughout the Old World, making possible the population densities that complex societies require. The sailboat opens river and ocean routes that connect distant regions in commercial and intellectual networks spanning continents. Less obvious, but equally important, are the organizational innovations that allow large populations to live together peacefully while specializing in different occupations. The division of labor that early cities pioneered becomes the foundation for all subsequent economic development. The bureaucratic methods that administrators developed for coordinating complex activities provide models for governmental organization that influence institutional design throughout history. The artistic achievements that emerged from ancient workshops establish aesthetic principles and technical methods that spread throughout the ancient world. The naturalistic sculpture that decorates temples influences artistic development from Egypt to India. The architectural techniques that builders developed for constructing monumental religious complexes provide inspiration for builders of pyramids, temples, and cathedrals throughout subsequent history. The narrative techniques that poets developed for epic literature create storytelling methods that appear in modified forms throughout world literature. The use of repetitive, formulaic phrases, the organization of plots around heroic quests, the integration of mythological and historical elements. These literary innovations establish patterns that influence storytelling from Homer to contemporary fiction. Perhaps most profoundly, the Mesopotamian experiment demonstrates that people can create forms of social organization that transcend the kinship groups and tribal affiliations that characterize most of ancient history. The possibility of living peacefully with strangers, of cooperating with people who speak different languages or worship different gods, of creating institutions that serve common interests rather than merely family or clan loyalties. These social innovations make possible every subsequent development in civilization. The rediscovery of this ancient society by modern archaeologists creates renewed appreciation for achievements that had been forgotten for over 2 millennia. When 19th century scholars begin excavating Mesopotamian sites, They uncover evidence of complex societies that predate anything mentioned in classical or biblical sources. The decipherment of cuneiform script reveals literary masterpieces that rival anything produced by later civilizations, while astronomical and mathematical texts demonstrate scientific sophistication that exceeds medieval European achievements. This archaeological renaissance transforms understanding of cultural development by pushing back the chronology of civilizational achievement and revealing the sophisticated institutional foundations that make settled life possible. The discovery that complex societies existed thousands of years before anything described in familiar historical sources forces reconsideration of assumptions about cultural progress and capability. The influence extends beyond academic circles to affect popular understanding of potential and cultural achievement. The Epic of Gilgamesh, virtually unknown before the late 19th century, becomes recognized as one of world literature's greatest masterpieces. Ancient art, architecture, and craftsmanship influence modern aesthetic sensibilities through museum exhibitions and scholarly publications. The story of humanity's initial experiment inspires contemporary thinking about planning, environmental sustainability, and social organization. Modern archaeological techniques continue revealing new aspects of achievement that expand appreciation for their innovations and insights. Satellite imagery reveals the extent of ancient irrigation systems that transformed entire regions. Chemical analysis of artifacts demonstrates trade networks that connected Mesopotamia to resources as distant as Afghanistan and Ethiopia. Computer modeling of cuneiform tablets reveals mathematical and astronomical knowledge that anticipates modern scientific understanding. The digital revolution creates new possibilities for preserving and studying textual heritage. Electronic databases make cuneiform literature accessible to scholars and students worldwide, while computer translation programs help decode texts that would otherwise remain incomprehensible to all but a handful of specialists. Virtual reality reconstructions allow people to experience ancient cities and temples as they appeared thousands of years ago. Yet the most important legacy lies not in specific innovations or achievements, but in the demonstration that creativity and cooperation can overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. The transformation of inhospitable marshlands into prosperous centers shows that environmental limitations need not determine cultural possibilities. Their development of complex institutions that coordinate thousands of people in peaceful cooperation demonstrates that societies can transcend tribal conflicts and ethnic divisions. The persistence of achievements, despite repeated political catastrophes, proves that ideas and institutions worthy of preservation will survive the destruction of the particular forms through which they initially find expression. Their synthesis of practical innovation with spiritual insight, of technological achievement with artistic beauty, of individual creativity with social responsibility, creates a model for balanced development that remains relevant for contemporary societies, facing their own challenges and opportunities. Perhaps most importantly, the ancient experience reveals that civilization itself is not a finished achievement, but an ongoing process that requires constant renewal and adaptation. Each generation must rediscover for itself the insights and values that make settled life possible, while adapting inherited institutions to contemporary needs and circumstances. The specific solutions that these pioneers developed for their particular challenges may not apply directly to modern problems, but the intellectual courage and creative persistence they demonstrated provide enduring inspiration for all subsequent endeavors. Standing in the galleries of museums where artifacts testify to achievements that seemed lost forever, contemporary observers can appreciate both the fragility and the durability of cultural achievement. The physical objects that survive, sculptures, tablets, jewelry, tools, represent only a tiny fraction of what these ancient people created, yet they suffice to reveal the scope and sophistication of humanity's initial great civilizational experiment. More importantly, the ideas and institutions that the earliest societies pioneered continue shaping experience in ways both visible and invisible. Every time we read written text, use mathematical notation, live in organized communities, or seek justice through legal procedures, we participate in traditions that began in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia over 5 millennia ago. They gave humanity its inaugural cities, its earliest writing, its initial literature, its original legal codes, its foundational mathematics, its pioneering monumental architecture, its prototype complex institutions. They demonstrated that people could create forms of social organization more sophisticated than anything the natural world provides, that cooperation could achieve what individual effort could never accomplish, that ideas and values could transcend the mortality of their creators to influence countless generations of descendants. Their legacy lives on not as museum artifacts or scholarly curiosities, but as living elements of civilization that continue growing and adapting to new circumstances. Every settlement, every written document, every mathematical calculation, every legal procedure carries forward their innovations while extending them into realms they could never have imagined. The earliest civilization has become all civilizations, its achievements so thoroughly integrated into experience that they seem natural rather than revolutionary. Yet they remain revolutionary in their demonstration of potential, their affirmation that creativity and cooperation can transform any environment, overcome any obstacle, and create meaning and beauty from the raw materials of existence itself. In the end, their greatest gift to humanity may be simply the proof that such gifts are possible, that ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges can create extraordinary solutions that benefit not only themselves, but countless generations of successors they will never meet. Their story continues wherever people gather in communities, seek knowledge, create beauty, pursue justice, or dream of better futures for their children and their children's children. The cradle of civilization has become the foundation of possibility itself.